There's a beef brewing between two prominent figures on the right, Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro.
The two have traded jabs in the past, but it seems like things have escalated a bit. Shapiro travelled to Ukraine in April to interview Vladimir Zelensky.
Once it was over, Shapiro gave an analysis and took a shot at Carlson and Vice President Vance while discussing Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin. Let's listen.
Among the people that he name-checks in his new book are Tucker Carlson and J.D. Vance, his ideological allies. And Tucker is Dugin's ally here. I mean, there's just no question about this. Tucker literally had on Dugin last year on his show and praised him, and then refused to ask him a single question about Russia or Russian ambitions because that might burst the viewer's bubble.
I'm merely saying we should talk openly and not leave it to the crazy people. And you can't, because all of a sudden you've got Ben Shapiro being like, oh, you're sucking up to Putin. You're anti-Semitic. It's like, son, sit this one out. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're a child, actually. And you're reading talking points that discredit you. I think Ben is smart. He probably has interesting things to say. But when you are unwilling to criticize a foreign government at all, it tells the rest of us what you're saying isn't real. Like,
Carlson did say that he doesn't think Shapiro is evil or a bad person. He said he just wishes there could be a more honest conversation about American involvement in foreign wars.
And what's so wrong with that? I agree with Tucker Carlson.
But I think Shapiro argues that Carlson has ducked debates with him. Now, I hesitate to get into this because you are a lot better versed on debates and personal enmities on the online right than I am. But Shapiro, I'm pretty sure, has offered to debate Carlson a number of times and believes that that hasn't happened.
I'm not sure which is the case. They did. They participated in a conversation years and years and years ago that was very interesting because it was heralding the breakup that was about to occur on the right, or some of the ideological arguments that were going to happen, because they were discussing basically loss of jobs due to jobs moving overseas. And Shapiro, who's more of a free market guy than Tucker Carlson, said something like, what are we going to do? We're going to have some policy to protect like all the trucking jobs in America? And Tucker was like, yeah, I would absolutely support that, which is now that kind of economic thinking is certainly more in vogue than it was before. On economic issues, I am much more in a Ben Shapiro camp. On foreign policy, I am much more in a Tucker Carlson camp. So I find their disputes interesting because I like and agree with some things Tucker says and like and agree with some things Ben Shapiro says. I think, in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, I, like Tucker and many others on the dissident right or the non-interventionist right, think we should have to live in reality and have to have an end to this war, even if it's going to result in Russia getting a lot more than we want to be the case. Like Ben Shapiro, I don't think that we should shy from calling out Russia as a autocratic country run by a bad man and an enemy of us. That's the line Trump takes. We played earlier in the show a clip of him talking about the need for, yes, Zelensky to negotiate with Russia, but saying, but Russia is a worse and weak country and the U.S. is so much greater, rah, rah, rah. So that's the Trump stance, which I agree with. But I think they should have a debate, and it's good to have these debates on the right, and that's all fine and good.
It is good to have these debates on the right or anywhere else. On the foreign policy question, I'm divided even within that, because I'm more on the Shapiro line in relation to Russia and Ukraine. And I think he makes a strong argument, and one that I think is a very important argument, about Putin and people like the guy we mentioned, Alexander Dugin, who don't really believe that Ukraine is an independent nation to start off with. And I think that sometimes gets overlooked both on a certain element of the right and on the extreme left, where we were talking about horseshoe politics earlier on. Often just it is the endless foregrounding of, well, it's about NATO expansionism, it's about Putin's fears. It's not only about that. I would argue it's not even primarily about that. It's about Putin's refusal to recognize Ukraine as an independent nation and his belief that it should be forcibly incorporated back into a kind of Russian empire. Now, on the other element of foreign policy that divides those two guys, Shapiro is extremely pro-Israel. I mean, believes that the West Bank should just be fully recognized as Israeli territory, has argued for decades that Palestinians should be kind of shipped off Palestinian land. I find those views completely abhorrent. I come down completely on the opposite side of that point. But it is good to have debates.
And Tucker, on the other hand, has made no secret of his vast disagreement with a myopically pro-Israel Hamas. We're not for terrorists, but the brutal destruction occurring there is going beyond anything that can be justified or anything that is going to be in the U.S.'s interest, which is the main issue. How does this serve U.S. policy? Going back just for a second to the Russia-Ukraine thing. So yes, Ukraine should remain. I want Ukraine to remain an independent country, but that is my reason for wanting to negotiate. I think if we pursue the current line, Russia will eventually conquer the entire country. And it is my desire to preserve something of Ukraine that I support the Trump administration policy of really pushing them to negotiate. Or else they're going to conquer the country. But to your broader point, well, you can respond to that if you want.
Well, I just don't think, I think that the costs for Russia become unsustainable in terms of loss of life, suffering, potentially decline of oil prices could further hamper the Russian economy, etc.
I just don't think that's
We just disagree.
But I agree with you on, some people on the left and maybe the right as well do this, and everybody does this selectively, and it always annoys me, where everything that you can the bad thing and then say, well, we're only reacting to something they did, but you can always play that game because everything that has happened in a foreign policy context is a response to something else. And you can always cut it off there and say, well, that's the initiator. But there's always something that came before that. Like, was the NATO expansion a good idea? No. Did that provoke Russia in some way? Yes. But the NATO expansion was because of the reality of the fallout from the Cold War, where we had a very hostile, evil, communist country
expansionist
doing a bad thing. But again, you don't have to cut it off there. They were responding to a czarist system of oppression, right? You can always go back another decade.
And a great powers war in the First World
War. You can always say, well, they did it for this reason, and they did it for this reason, and they did it for this reason. And what people who want to maximize U.S. responsibility and minimize responsibility will always say, well, we are the prime mover. So none of our actions are inspired or caused by anything else. So we are always the instigator of bad things that happen, whereas the other guy, well, they're just doing for X, Y, Z.
In reaction to U.S. actions.
And that is a dumb argument when you think about it.
Yeah.
We, like them, are reacting to things, and I always want to be forward-thinking and say, well, Israel-Palestine is the prime example of this. Israel did a lot of bad things to Palestine. Palestine does a lot of bad. Hamas does a lot of bad things to Israel. You can justify this forever. You can always go back and say, well, they did it for this reason. Well, they did it for this reason. Well, they did it for this reason. There's been conflict in this region for 2,000 years and beyond. So if you're always going to be backward looking and saying, well, this is the reason this is justified, you'll just have war forever. And the way you bring down conflict in modern times is to say, you know what? We're just going to say we're not going to have an argument anymore about who's justified for whatever reason. We're just going to say we want peace, and these are going to be the terms of that peace.
Yeah, I agree with that point, and I think we may disagree in terms of the Russia-Ukraine question, but I agree with that argument, and even some people on the left, I do disagree when they tend sometimes to propose foreign policies that I think they see as aimed at expiating the sins of the past.
Yeah.
Like, you got to work with what the situation is now. I think the situation in Gaza is appalling. I wouldn't support Israel in doing it. I think the situation in Ukraine is appalling in a different way, and I'd back up the Ukrainians. People can have legitimate differences about that, but you've got to work with what the facts are right now.
Up next, hostile powers buying influence in U.S. elite schools. We will talk to a reporter from the Free Press. Stay with us.